A villain, a dreamer, a cartoonist. Do you ever worry about air pollution or about dishonest politicians? Well, so did people in the 19th century. Just to reassure you, most politicians are honest and most air is clean, but that's no reason to relax. There are people around who will mess up the world if we let them. One of the worst in the 10 years after the Civil War was a man named William Marcy Tweed. He was called Boss Tweed, and he ran New York City's political machine. Political machines were unofficial governments that existed alongside the real city governments. Each had its own functions. Machines thrived in many 19th century cities. In New York, Tammany Hall was one of the most powerful of all the urban political machines. Insiders had their own name for Tammany. It was the Tiger. That beast did some good, actually, quite a bit of good, especially for immigrants who needed help getting started in America. But it was all at a price. Tammany paid people to vote, sometimes a dozen times each, in bribery. Well, the Tiger bribed the police, the elected officials, anyone who would take money. New York had problems, big problems, especially problems of air pollution and traffic congestion. Some 700,000 people lived in New York, most of them squeezed into a small area near the tip of Manhattan Island. Much of the city's businesses took place around a famous street called Broadway. Trying to walk or take a horse drawn bus down Broadway was a nightmare. There were so many people, it sometimes took an hour just to move a few yards. And talk about pollution. Woo, hold your nose and let me tell you about it. New York was home to more than 100,000 horses. Now, a healthy horse dumps a whole lot of manure each day. Imagine all that smelly manure spread around by wheels and feet. When the manure dries, it turns into powder that blows in your face and goes up your nostrils. But that isn't the worst of it. In the 19th century, people and businesses could burn anything they wanted. Mostly that was coal, which put black fumes in the air. Even worse, Standard Oil had a New York refinery. Oil refineries without controls give off terrible, noxious fumes. That oil refinery was a big polluter. Hold on, that's not all. When Boss Tweed controlled New York, there wasn't much in the way of sanitary services, so people often dumped their garbage in the streets. Garbage smells, especially in August. Are you choking? Well, I still haven't mentioned the pigs. Pigs ran about eating garbage and leaving their own smells in dumplings. And there were flies and disease. But you may have heard of enough. Here is a cartoon by the artist Thomas Nass. Original caption for Boss Tweed cartoon read, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" There you are in the middle of Broadway and you want to go away. Get away. You climb on a horse-drawn bus. It sways back and forth so violently that some passengers get seasick. You try walking, but there are no street lights. They haven't been invented yet. Horses, people, buses, and carriages are all pulling and pushing and shoving on Broadway. Pedestrians often get killed in traffic accidents. Have you had enough of the good old days? So had a lot of people in the 19th century. The politicians said that the soot in the air was a sign of modern progress, but most people were beginning to gasp for fresh air. Fresh air was the last thing that Boss Tweed cared about. He was a scoundrel, a really bad guy who controlled most of the city jobs and services. He used his power to get money for himself. He bribed others and forced them to do as he wished. Here's an example of the way he worked. A new city courthouse was to be built. Boss Tweed became the contractor and charged the city 3 or 4 times what the building actually cost. He put the difference in his pocket. Then he filled the building with $50 sofas and charged the city $5,000 for each. How did he get away with that? Well, he was charming in a scoundrelly way, so he fooled people. Many citizens didn't realize he was stealing from them, and because he was so powerful, those who did know were afraid to do anything about it. Who's the boss? William Marcy Tweed was called Boss Tweed because that's exactly what he was, the boss. He wasn't elected to run New York, but he did anyway. He was actually a city alderman. An alderman is a member of a city legislative body. He was never mayor. It didn't matter. He controlled the New York State Democratic Party and the Tammany Hall political machine. Tweed put graft, getting dishonest money, on a business-like basis. All city contractors were padded by a fixed amount, which went to Tweed and his cronies. At the Tammany Clubhouse he slept in a bed with blue silk sheets. He sometimes entertained on his yacht, the William M. Tweed, which had a crew of 12, fancy furniture and oriental rugs. When Tweed went to jail, he was asked his occupation, and he said statesman. Except for a quiet, frail little man named Alfred Eli Beach. Beach was a genius, an inventor, a publisher, and a patent lawyer. He invented one of the world's first typewriters. When he was only 19, Beach took over a small magazine named Scientific American, and he helped make it a fine journal it is today. He became a publisher of New York Sun, and it became an important newspaper. But that isn't what this story is about. It is about Eli Beach's fight with Boss Tweed. Beach wanted to do something about the traffic congestion on the New York streets. He thought and finally came up with an idea of putting a railroad train underground. He called it a subway. He knew Boss Tweed wouldn't let him build it unless he agreed to give Tweed millions of dollars, and Beach was too honest a man to pay off a politician. He decided to build a subway and not tell Tweed. He built it right under Broadway, and hardly anyone knew he was doing it. He invented a hydraulic tunneling machine and a pneumatic subway. He got laborers to work at night and to haul dirt away in wagons with wheels muffled so they wouldn't make noise. It took 58 nights of secret work to get the tunnel done. In February 1870, a group of New York newspaper reporters were invited to a reception. They were surprised when they were led underground into a beautiful, large waiting room. Paintings hung on the bright walls. A pianist played on a grand piano. A fountain splashed and goldfish swam in a giant tank. Beach had done it. His subway was ready. The reporters all took a ride in the cylinder-shaped wooden car. The car had handsome upholstery seats and fine woodwork and gas lamps. It fit tight like a bullet in a rifle and moved down the tracks inside a round brick underground tube. It went right under Broadway, under the pollution and the traffic. What made it move? Well, a giant fan blew 371 feet. There There the subway car stopped and tripped a wire. That made the fan reverse itself, and it sucked the subway car back. Beach saw his subway as a model for a grand subway he had planned. It would carry 20,000 passengers a day and go for 5 miles to Central Park. He said at a speed of a mile a minute. A mile a minute? Nothing had ever gone that fast. Boss Tweed was outraged. He controlled all of the streetcars in the city. This was a threat to his power. He must have pounded his diamond ring fingers. He got in touch with the governor, his governor. He bribed and bought him. What happened is a long and complicated story, and I can't tell it all here. People flocked to Beach's little subway. They rode back and forth under Broadway. Beach gave the subway profits to charity. The state legislature passed a bill allowing Beach to build a grand subway. Tweed's governor vetoed it. Beach worked hard talking to congressmen, and a second subway bill was passed. Governor John T. Hoffman vetoed it again. Finally, the newspapers began writing editorials telling the truth about Boss Tweed. A cartoonist named Thomas Nash drew funny cartoons that showed Tweed was a wicked man that he was. Tweed threatened Nash. "I don't care what the papers write about me. My constituents can't read," said Tweed. "But damn it, they can see pictures." When threats didn't work, Boss Tweed offered Thomas Nast a $500,000 to stop drawing his cartoons. Nast kept drawing. Now people were getting angry about Boss Tweed. Most New Yorkers just hadn't known what he'd been doing. Tweed was arrested and charged with fraud. He had lied, stolen, and cheated. He was sent to jail. William Marcy Tweed died in jail at the age of 55. So much for that bad guy. The state legislature finally passed a third beach transit bill, but by this time Alfred Eli Beach was a tired man. The stock market was in trouble. It was hard to raise money. Beach no longer had the energy. Constituents are people a politician represents. Fraud is deception and swindling. Or money to build his grand subway. The subway under Broadway was closed and sealed up. Beach concentrated on publishing and helping others. Inventors loved him. One day, Thomas Edison brought a talking box to him. Beach turned the handle in the box. "Good morning, sir," said the machine. "How are you? How do you like my talking box?" Beach spent that money he had left on others. He founded an institute in Savannah, Georgia, to give free schooling to former slaves. He taught himself Spanish and founded a scientific magazine in that language. At 69, he died quietly of pneumonia, loved and respected by those who knew him. When the city of New York finally built a subway in 1904, workers tunneling under Broadway were startled to come upon a grand reception room and a small, elegant, wood-paneled subway. Today, scientists say a jet-powered subway in a vacuum tube could whoosh people across the country at amazing